Thank you. Welcome all. We are very happy to be here again in our second day, second conference of our great EGADE MBA Summit 2021. Today we will have a great conference by Michael Shanks from the University of Stanford. We opened the event with a very nice conference by Juan Pablo Mura, our dean, talking about the future of education. And I am sure that today you will have a great conference as well by Michael Shanks. Before that, let me introduce you to Tamara Carton. Tamara is also professor from Stanford University and also visiting professor at the EGADE Business School. And also we had the privilege to have been working with her in organizing all this event. Welcome, Tamara. Tamara will be accompanying Michael through the presentation and also joining the Q&A session at the end. I hope you will find it very interesting and also to have a lot of questions here for Michael. Thank you, Tamara. Thank you, Michael. Please go ahead, Tamara. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. I'm very delighted to be here. I've been working with EGADE Business School for the past 3 years with several programs, and then now definitely engaged as part of the international faculty. I'm very excited to announce Michael Shanks as our featured speaker for today. He and I know each other for easily 16 years through work that we've done together at Stanford, particularly in the space of design and foresight. So you'll be hearing some highlights in his talk. And for those of you that are returning for the other sessions, and please sign up for more week 3 and 4 if you're part of the MBA cohort, because there'll be a lot more wonderful activities and talks planned. And Eric and I will be co-emceeing together, so many of you will be seeing more of me as well. With that, let's play a short video that will highlight some bio elements from Michael.
Michael Shanks, PhD, is a professor of classics at Stanford University. He does what most people associate with archaeology, dig up the past, and he is part of the team excavating the Roman town of Binchester in the north of England. His expertise in ancient Greece and Rome is also the basis for his interest in all manner of archaeological themes, including the history of design, long-term patterns in history, and heritage. Shanks is also a senior faculty member of the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford University, where he champions history and memory in enlightened design thinking and practice. Welcome Michael to the virtual MBA Summit 2021.
Okay, hello. It's really great to be here, and I want to pick up your big, broad topic of how we might deal with the future, how we might navigate the future, especially when we are so conscious, are we not now, of how things can come along unexpectedly. How do we deal with the complex world we're in, the different uncertainties, ambiguities that we face? And I have a couple of case studies to share with you, as well as some general orientation on what we call design foresight. So let me plunge straight in. The title is Seeing the Bigger Picture, Designing Future Mobility. A little bit about me first to give you an idea of where I'm coming from. So yes, as you've heard, I'm at Stanford University. We have a unit here which for a good number of years now has been dedicated to, again, what we're calling design foresight. There's some other stuff I do. I work in urban studies. I work, yes, in the design school, but I'm also an archaeologist. I work with companies as an archaeologist on indeed what we are now beginning to call business archaeology. And you'll see why we're calling it that as I go through my talk. What's the standpoint I'm going to share with you? As indicated by the title, it's about building a bigger picture. I'm very interested in how we can step back from the challenges, from our aims and objectives in business and in our communities, how we can stand back to get a bigger picture so that we can be more effective, so that we can be more able to achieve our goals both short term as well as indeed longer term through strategic planning. As an archaeologist, I take a long-term perspective on basically where we've come from as a community, as a world, as a species, even humans. In particular, I'm interested in change and innovation. I'm interested in long-term pictures, big pictures that can inform specific actions. I'm very much interested in how framing the way we understand our challenges, the way we understand our problems, the way we understand what we want to do, how framing can be critical in helping us get to actually where we want to go to. Some background for me, I've worked for many years with the city and port of Rotterdam on their not just economic planning, but their whole, strategic planning, basically. I have a particular interest in urban futures and, again, where we've come from in terms of urban dwelling and how this can inform how we might plan, design future cities. And yes, a topic that I'm going to share with you a little bit more today, automobility, mobility, where we've come from in terms of mobility, the automobile, and everything else, and where we're going to. I'm an archaeologist. Yes, I do still, in fact, do spend a great deal of time on what you'd expect an archaeologist would do. I dig up the past, and I work in museums and all sorts. I mentioned I have two particular interests. Why do things change? And innovation. How do new things happen? And that is what I'm going to specifically focus on today. How might we understand and indeed prompt, make new things happen? How do we innovate when we know that innovation is almost the name of the game, and especially when it comes to mobility? I'm going to give you just one message, really, that underlies pretty much everything we do here in our design group at Stanford. And that is that if you want to understand innovation, past, present, and future, focus on people. This is possibly the biggest, most important message I actually have if you're going to take away anything today. And that is that innovation is never simply about technology. I know we think that today. We think that the world is driven by technological innovation. No. Actually, any kind of research digging into any particular case study that is about technological innovation shows that it's always about people. It's always about how people organize themselves, where they're coming from, and where they're going to. Focus on people. Human-centered design is pretty much kind of what we can summarize our interest here at Stanford as in relationship to change, innovation, engineering, technology, human-centered design. And yes, Stanford has had a long-standing interest in this now, and I'm going to be sharing some of the outlook, really, the paradigm, the mindset, the tools, the techniques that come through a long-standing interest in Stanford's School of Engineering in Design. A little bit of background again, Stanford being in Silicon Valley, our research and even just common everyday experience points to something that, again, is quite significant for you with your business perspectives on innovation, change management, and all the rest. That a design mindset, I'm going to be sharing some components of that, is the main reason for the innovation capacity of Silicon Valley. I'm sure you're familiar with a good deal of the literatures on design mindset, design thinking, and what we are now calling design foresight, which is essentially the next generation of design thinking. How important what we're calling here design foresight, design thinking is. Here are just some figures to back that up. Human-centered design, design thinking, as it has also been called here at Stanford, of course, beyond, design-based innovation Again, how important these are, here are just a couple of statistics. You can view them again in the slide deck, which is available after this talk. Again, just to emphasize, the phrasing I'm using, design foresight, related to another, well, it's the same, it's an evolved form, really, of what you might be more familiar with, design thinking. Okay, let's just plunge into some aspects of this now. What is design thinking, design foresight? First of all, we're not talking about product design. Although I'm going to be talking about automobiles soon, in a few moments, we're not talking about product design. We're not primarily talking about technology and, for example, engineering design. Although both product and engineering are going to be involved. We're not talking about designers. Design thinking is not primarily focused on the designer as the familiar figure, such as you see here, the likes of Johnny Ive, who was for a long while, head of design at Apple. We're talking about something else, really, in design thinking. We're not talking about something that is often associated with the concept of design, which is styling, the way things look. As we see here in this 1962 Mini Cooper S, it has a very distinctive look, a very distinctive design look. That's not really what we're talking about. Nor are we talking about graphic design. So what are we talking about then? Well, design thinking and design foresight are so much more. They're so much more than all of these things. Design, we are understanding, is a process. It's a way of working. It's a mindset, an attitude, a pragmatic way of working. It's a bundle of methods, strategies, tactics. And it's focused on, as I'm saying here, researching needs and wants, how you understand challenges, how you frame them, how you might explore different ways of tackling challenges, how you might try things out, experiment, prototype, and in the end, deliver innovation. It is action-oriented on delivering sometimes answers to questions that you have, solutions to problems, but more importantly, it's about exploring alternatives. And fundamentally, you can summarize it as managing projects. So, flexible, agile it is. It's an attitude, a mindset, it's a toolkit, and it's about planning, managing projects. This is why design foresight, design thinking have been considered so important to the business world. Now, we're calling it design foresight. This is where what I'm talking about connects with your interest in your conference here in the future. Design foresight. Foresight is looking forward, but it's not about predicting the future. This is going to be crucial for us to understand. It's not about predicting, forecasting what might happen in 5, 10, 20 or more years. No, it's actually a mindset and toolkit, yes, for gaining perspective on the now and preparing, indeed anticipating different kinds of futures. So it's much more about now than it is about figuring out, trying to predict what might come. Some people, when they're doing strategic planning, for example, think that foresight is a bit like being a sprinter. That is, you're in a race, you're in the now, you're in the starting blocks, and you've got your target ahead of you at the end of the race, the finishing line. You train to be as efficient as possible, as fast as possible to get to that finishing line. You have a fixed target, you know what you want. You're oriented on the future in this respect, and you have a pretty set idea of what you want to do. You want to win to get to the end. No, this is not the kind of mindset, attitude, framing that we offer in design foresight. Here's a little quote from Steve Jobs that kind of captures what we mean here. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust the dots that they will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, whatever it might be, This approach, Steve Jobs says, has never let me down and has made all the difference in my life. It's foresight about looking back so that you might anticipate different futures and pull them together in the future. Looking ahead then in design foresight is like being a surfer. You look back at the waves as they come in so that you can choose the right wave to commit to. And yes, it'll get you to where you want to go. That is the beach. Well, it's not really where you want to go. You don't want to end up on the beach primarily. The point is to immerse yourself in the experience, to indulge the process, the activity. And that's a key component of what we're talking about. It's process oriented rather than object oriented, objective oriented, target oriented. So that's a general orientation on design foresight. I mentioned that it's a toolkit. It's oriented on now different tools and techniques for anticipating what might happen in the future, and so be more effective in your contemporary, your current, your ongoing decision-making, planning, project management. There are many toolkits out there. We have one here, this blue playbook for strategic foresight and innovation. You can find that as a free download on our website. And it was produced by Tamara, who's with us, of course, today, and Bill Cocaine, who I've also been working with at Stanford for a good number of years. And we've also worked a long time here at Stanford with what was a local design consultancy called IDEO, who are now global. And we've also have another design toolkit book, playbook out, which is pictured here. And that comes out of the Hasso-Plattner institutes at Stanford and at Potsdam in Europe. The toolkits contain a whole suite of ways that you can pursue design thinking, design foresight. I'm going to take you into a couple of those today, but just bear in mind that these are sophisticated, wide-ranging toolkits that let you do a whole load of activities, research-based, decision-based, decision-making-based tools that involve things like prototyping, finding out about what might be possible in the way of product development, service development, or designing new kinds of experiences and relationships for your customers, for your clients, for your communities, for stakeholders. So many different tools and toolkits, most of which are really surprisingly simple. That's another kind of secondary message, but important one that I have for you today, which is that these skill sets, these toolkits, anybody can acquire them. This is not rocket science. I always say that. Rocket science doesn't have to be complicated either. These are skill sets that we can all learn, we can all acquire, and they kind of benefit from just you practicing them. Again, we're action-oriented on looking at how we manage our projects. Now, these toolkits have a significant creative component. As I mentioned at the beginning, we know, we're all familiar with the world we live in being complex, being difficult to predict. Things happen like COVID. Things happen like the 2008 financial crisis. Things happen that people do not anticipate. If there's one kind of message about actually looking to the future, it is we will get it wrong. And we will not anticipate stuff that comes along to, well, surprise us. How do we navigate this kind of complexity? This is where design foresight really comes in, because it's about, as I've already mentioned, being flexible, anticipating rather than predicting. It's about embracing creative ambiguity. Here, I'm going to say a little bit about mindset. And this, I think, is really critical for really managing projects, managing businesses and corporations, It's about how we help our communities deal with complexity. There is a particular mindset that we're very familiar with today in business and in technology, where the world is treated as a series of problems or challenges for which you can find solutions. Some of these are big. Climate change. We know it's a set of problems. We're focused on how we might find solutions to those problems. COVID, a problem. How do we fix it? Well, we need a vaccine. We need people to change their behavior in certain ways. How do we manage this mindset? How do we put it into practice? We see enormous amounts of resources and energy and effort put into capturing data, analyzing information to look for patterns, working out what is going on, rationalizing it in terms of cause and effect, correlation, and figuring out what's going on, breaking down what people do into components, behaviors, and then applying algorithms to this understanding of the world. We are increasingly seeing that we need to capture data through many different kinds of sources by using sensors, monitoring what's going on as much as we can to build up big data, quantifying our handle on the world, and then seeking to optimize and to eliminate ambiguity. It's a general mindset that's at the heart of most, actually, of our management, governance, product development, service development. It's a particular mindset. It's not wrong. It has a very simple structure, and it has been incredibly successful. You define a problem, you engineer a solution. We're good at this. It is also limited. It's limited in its capacity to deal with the unexpected. What happens if you can't define the problem? What happens if there is no problem and you're just facing challenges? You're facing issues in the world that are just part of that world. For example, COVID is a challenge, is a problem. Yes, it's also a feature of living as a human in a complex ecosystem. This is not the last, nor was it the first epidemic, pandemic that we faced. It's actually a feature of the world we live in. Yes, we can find local solutions. It's going to come back. So the mindset is relatively limited. You can summarize it. This is a familiar character from my kids' childhood, Bob the Builder. Bob in the cartoons in which he features is faced with challenges, is faced with problems that people come up with. And Bob is a fixer. You go to Bob and his team and you say, "Can you fix this for us, Bob?" He always says, "Yes, we can fix it. Yes, we can." That's, as I say, a powerful, successful mindset, but it is faced with certain limitations when it comes to unpredictability, uncertainty, complexity. An example of this in the field of mobility, the limitations of the mindset, is the infamous case of the Segway. This is a good number of years old now, this great, call it an adventure, an engineering adventure, where the Segway was promoted, heavily promoted, marketed, and then rolled out as a personal mobility device that was going to solve the problems, the challenges of commuting. It was incredibly, it is very technically smart. It works beautifully. It's electric. It was meant to give people personal mobility and get people out of automobiles and put them, well, where? On the streets? Yeah. But one of these in traffic, you're standing on it, it's, yeah. Or on the sidewalk, well, it does 35 miles an hour if you wanted to. So how are you mixing people and traffic and segways? Plus, it was expensive, and nobody saw why they really needed this. The engineers had figured out that it might solve the problem, or they thought it should solve the problem of congestion in commuting by downsizing, by getting everybody on their own devices and out of cars. Nobody wanted it. What the engineers who came up with this remarkable product didn't get was that they weren't really understanding people. They had missed the people out of their work. They'd left them out. They thought they could figure it all out as an engineering problem. It was not. Commuting, transport, mobility is not primarily about tech. It's about people. Of course, technology is involved. However, start with the people. So creative innovation, we might say, is never primarily about engineering and technology. It's about people. This is what we mean when we call it human-centered design. So we have a very successful mindset that's focused on tech, on solving problems. It's not bad. It's good. It's successful, but it's not enough. What we also need is an imagination toolkit for future world building. Not just engineering technological solutions to problems that we might not even understand. How do we build futures that we might never imagine if we didn't embrace creativity? We need a future-centered toolkit centered not on predefined solutions to problems we're facing, but on exploring options that might actually be difficult to pin down and define. And mobility is one of them. I'm not going to say much about what I've got on screen here today. This is a different kind of mindset where the emphasis is much more on experimentation, on trying things out. That's the iteration, repeating, prototyping, building, exploring, and fundamentally about reframing. And I'm going to talk about reframing when it comes to mobility as I move into our case study now on future mobility. I'm going to start with something very simple. It's part of our toolkit in design foresight, timelines. Timelines are ways of looking back so that you understand where you've come from with a view to where you might be going. In our playbook that I mentioned earlier, the blue one that's available online as a free PDF, we have three tools for providing orientation that are about, this, well, let's just stick with the timeline approach. I'm going to move us now into a timeline approach to mobility itself. Mobility, in fact, focused in this case, for the sake of this case study, on 2050, Mobility 2050. So there's our little exercise, our little case study. And this is based on work I've done now for a good number of years. First, it was with Daimler, Chrysler, and now with Nissan. So let's look ahead in and through design foresight to 2050. I mentioned framing is important. We might think that future mobility and all of our big corporations, car corporations, of course, appropriately focus on the tech, the engineering, the advanced engineering of automobiles. Is that what the future of mobility is all about? Well, it's going to partly be about that, of course. But how do we get our heads around automobility itself? How we frame it, how we understand it? Here's a way of reframing. First of all, just a little bit of history. Here we have, it looks like a late 1930s Bentley automobile in an advertising image from probably around about the mid to late 1920s, as I say. The automobile here is racing ahead. It's running ahead of a great big locomotive, which is kind of seen as the past. And then off to the left there, you have left in the dust, an old horse and cart. Here, then, the automobile, future-oriented, about performance, that is speed, about independence. You're not on rail tracks, you're on a road, and you are in charge. There's the driver behind the wheel. Bentley, and indeed most car manufacturers, have been very concerned about how the automobile is presented to people and how people use the automobile in certain ways to develop, for example, their sense of autonomy, of being in charge, and also senses of being in charge of power, of performance, speed, and all the rest. Bentley DNA, sometimes this term is used, the genetics, the core DNA of a product. Bentley DNA had a very distinctive, and still does, set of values associated with the mark, with the brand. They were always, and have consistently been always, over-engineered. This is the fuel cap, a great big, massively over-engineered hubcap, fuel tank cap from a 1930s Bentley, where the whole feel of the automobile is reflected in the way it's actually built. This is more than engineering. This is creating an image of a certain kind of automobile and how it speaks to you, how it connects with you in terms of your perceptions. Automobiles connect with us in terms of what we think might be appropriate, what might make us feel secure over engineering. Here's another automobile from before the First World War. It's a Peugeot. It was a race car. We might think that the history of the automobile is about progress, technological progress, that we get better and better, that we've moved from early automobiles not so efficient, not so good at performing, through better and better engineering to the automobiles of today. And we're looking at the evolution of the internal combustion engine into different kinds of powertrain, including electric. In fact, the story of the automobile is not one of progress, linear progress. The reason why I have this automobile on screen here is that in 1913, this Peugeot anticipated many of the engineering achievements, developments in the development, yes, of the internal combustion engine of the 20th century. These developments, which included a VTEC engine, twin overhead camshaft, all sorts of engineering developments, yes, were there in this automobile and were implemented only gradually, actually, over the 20th century. So the engineering is not one of progress. And that might surprise some people, that tech is not about progress. No, it isn't, actually. Sometimes it looks as if it is, but not always. Now, of course, we're facing some very interesting, fascinating, actually, challenges to our relationship with automobiles. That's what I've been flagging up, for example, in looking at Bentley DNA, our relationship with some piece of hardware like that. Now we're faced with questions of how do we get on with autonomous vehicles, with robot cars, questions of ethics. Who's in charge of the car when there's an accident? Who's to blame? Issues of infrastructures. The automobile needs all sorts. The autonomous automobile needs all sorts of infrastructures. Interoperabilities. That is, the car now has to work with many other forms of technology. And how do we talk? How do we interface with automobiles? These are raising a whole series of questions that take us, frankly, into areas that were not always, still are not often, the subject of engineering, of design, but they are critical and they're becoming more obvious. They're questioning just what an automobile is to us. Here is just a reminder for me, frankly, of a wonderful designer, Masato Inoue, who for a long while headed the team at Nissan. And this was one of the concept cars. I think this might be the 2012 Tokyo Motor Show. Masato Inoue was someone who looked outside the box when it came to automotive design. He was head of the team that did the Leaf, yes, but really I think Masato came really into his superb skills, his genius in imagining different kinds of futures for mobility. And he was particularly focused on our relationship with the environment. I remember lovely, wonderful conversations with Masato about the history of forests. And he sketched for me, and you can find the video on my website. He sketched for me in a little conversation we had, a vision of the future in which his electric car, his autonomous electric car, accompanied him, it's intelligent, accompanied him on a picnic in the forest. He had a wonderful time in nature, and a beautiful boxed lunch. They have fabulous boxed lunches in Japan with some fabulous sake to go with it, to enjoy nature. But of course, some drink and alcohol do not mix with automobility. But the car is intelligent. It knows how to get home. It can take Masato Inoue home, but it doesn't whisk him home. No. The car, the electric car, gently, slowly takes Masato home through the forest so he can enjoy nature at walking pace. His car walks him home through the forest. An extraordinary image of a different kind of future for the automobile, a different frame we might apply, and we might call it indeed a love of nature. Timelines I mentioned. I've started building up some of the components that might figure in a timeline that takes us from the history, the early history of automobiles, through to the future, as imagined in this particular one case by Masato Inoue. We have a toolkit called Janus cones, which help us visualize these kind of histories that give us a big picture on where mobilities come from and where it might be going. Here is one. I don't expect you to look at the details. The key is that it comprises two triangles. The points of the triangles, the blue one on the left, the green one on the right, meet at the present. So in the middle, 2020, 2021 is the present. And then this was just simply an exercise, and it's nothing particularly special, but it gives orientation by looking back to the Model T Ford 1900s, and then looks forward under four possible categories. What might be possible? What might be plausible in the future? What might be probable? And what might be preferable? So looking back, that we might gain perspective on what's happening now with a view to the possible, plausible, probable, preferable future. Again, you can look at the details of this in the slide deck afterwards if you should so wish. Here is an elaboration, an abstract view of the forward-looking cone in a Janus cone. Janus looks back as well as forward, named after the Roman god who did so, look back, that he might look forward. Here we go with the possible, plausible, probable, and indeed preferable. It's about orienting yourself on possible, as I say, ways ahead and figuring out what might actually be preferable. Not predicting the future, remember. We're gaining orientation. And this cone here comes out of the world of speculative design. And I've mentioned there Dunn and Raby, who have a book out where they elaborate on speculative design. Here's another Janus cone. It's more generic. But again, it just shows how we can look back in order to gain perspective on what might be coming along. The center right there, powertrain, ownership, autonomy, indicates some of the main concerns taken by corporate automobile companies today. A focus on powertrain, so electric motor development, for example, ownership, ride sharing is a big deal, autonomy, AI, and such. So we have EV, electric vehicles, AV, autonomous vehicles, and then the whole, as rightly some people see it, disruptive development of ride sharing. What are the issues then that we might look forward to seeing happen, to seeing come to be important in the future of mobility, designing future mobility? And I've mentioned, we put some of them here on the right of this diagram. Issues of co-presence. What does that mean? That means about being together. Look at what COVID has done for us in terms of emphasizing the significance to our life world, to the way we live, the significance of being with others and being distant from them. We like to be co-present in the presence of our friends and family and co-workers, but we also know that this comes at certain costs and involves certain aspects of, yes, life and experience in an everyday sense. COVID has really brought this out. This is actually has always been a major component in understanding and designing mobility, bringing people together in a car interior, or getting someone to come to you, or you going to them. But co-presence has all sorts of possibilities. This is just one concept, co-presence, presence, that we can see at the heart of designing mobility. We can focus on that to imagine different futures, and we can focus on all the others here. Ubiquitous networks, community and society, and how it's changing, urbanization, for example, and how that's impacting the design, planning for future mobility. I mentioned reframing. In this gaining of perspective by looking back, hindsight, to get insight into where we are now with a view to foresight, this means that we can seriously address a curious question, you might say. Just what is a car? Well, it involves all of this. It's not just a box on four wheels, co-presence, as I've just been describing, but relationships between home and work. The automobile is heavily involved in massive industries, both technical and financial, that aren't to do with mobility. The automobile is entangled in a world in so many different ways. It involves all sorts of different aspects that we might address in designing the future. So these kind of tools, such as timelines, Janus cones, help us imagine the future so as to decide what to find out more about now, so as to orient our research so that we might be able to look ahead at innovation and potential. Again, this is quite detailed. I don't want to go into the details, but what this can help us do, this orientation, this framing, is to identify values, human values, social values, cultural values, that will be referenced in future mobility. Here are some. Connectivity, digitally mediated connectivity. What I mentioned with Masato Inoue, attitudes towards the environment, values attributed to the environment, how we feel about where we live, locality and place, and accessibility, how we can help more people get access to mobility to improve well-being. Values then, identifying them, getting us into the human side of planning, of looking ahead, rather than the tech side. Here is a very familiar, perhaps for hopefully all of you, way of helping visualize such thinking. That is a focus on values. It's a 2x2 matrix. What you do is you map one vector of value against another. In this case, it's trust, really, an investment in technology, low tech, high tech, mapped against our attitudes towards life and the environment, with a green mindset or a non-green mindset, top and bottom. Again, I'm not going to go into the details, but it lets us spot possible futures, scenarios. We're using values here that we've identified in a timeline to orient us on different possible futures. It's a very familiar component, again, some of you may be familiar with this, of what has always, has since the 1970s been called scenario planning. But what we're doing here is adjusting it not to be focused really more on predicting and forecasting, but on imagining future scenarios. So what I've just been showing you there, and the 4 sets of values, are not predictions about where the future is going to be. No, this is about opening us to possibilities, helping our imagination. And you could therefore, and this is actually the 4 scenarios that we developed recently in this design foresight exercise, imagining a future in 4 different ways. Why 4? It's not too many and it's not too few. Are these predictions again emphasized? No. Again, you can look at this later, but let's take the first one, a scenario, an imagined future called digital bubbles. Here is just a simple story that captures this imagined future of mobility. The artificial intelligent sleeping unit has adjusted temperature, sleeping angle, and ambient music. We are here imagining the year 2050 and mobility, according to the process I've just outlined. It monitors my sleep pattern, has woken me up at the most appropriate time for maximizing my energy for the day. The autonomous vehicle network has been activated by a prompt from my sleep unit. Coffee is scheduled to be ready for me in the robot car, but my exercise bike takes me on a virtual reality ride with friends along a coastal road, and we chat about a new online community of philosophy enthusiasts. After a refreshing shower, I get in the robot car, where a wonderful coffee awaits me, along with the vehicle's customized and automatically delivered fresh fruit breakfast. I take in a couple of online meetings on the journey to the data center construction site, a trip I only make every couple of weeks. Is this a prediction of the future? No. It's an imagined future where people are wrapped up in what we're calling digital bubbles. That is an investment, really, an extension of our interest in social networking software and such that we are so familiar with today. It's a way of looking forward on the basis of research, hindsight, insight, foresight. More detail for you to read later if you wish. So, this is just simply a case study. Let me just wind up now and say where this is taking us. It's a case study in how we might use a particular set of tools, design foresight, to gain orientation on what might be possible in the future, and so help us plan more effectively, to be innovative, and to be prepared for uncertainty and make the most of it in terms of our community, business, needs, desires, wants. Here are some things we might help in our communities and businesses to make this happen. First, you need to connect such scenarios to designing products, designing services. And it's human value centered. So it needs to be incorporated into management. That's basically it. This doesn't happen very often. Most companies don't go down this line. Massive corporations don't go down this line even. And it needs to keep going on. You need a rolling program of monitoring what's going on around you. This is critical to good decision making for future mobilities and everything else. And the second big really bunch of recommendations around design foresight is that it's a skill set that involves research and building capacity to do this research, to build these kind of tools into management is critical. And a lot of it is actually about collaboration and consortiums, if you like, that in the case here of future mobility, take us beyond the automotive sector. We need to be more connected, more aware of the broad field of human values and social innovation. And we can do this effectively, be aware of this, manage, make decisions. We can do it effectively using design foresight. There we are. Thank you.
Fantastic. Michael, we have received a number of interesting questions from the students, and I'm afraid we have the good problem that we won't be able to get to them all. But let me ask a few in our remaining time. One question from a student. Michael, can you please explain what future challenges are related to the organizational culture for design thinking and innovation?
Oh boy, Tamara, don't we just know this question? This is probably the most common question Tamara and I get asked. Okay, we get it. The question goes, what do we do? How do we do this? It is, of course, a question concerned with change management. How do you manage organizational change? How do you build up a culture, really, a mindset that is focused on such toolkits and attitudes within a company, or a corporation, or indeed a community? There are answers, and they're well-founded and tried and tested. Some components are, number one, good leadership. Boy, oh boy, if you don't have um, a leadership that gets what's going on and what is needed, it'll never happen. So if you don't have a leadership, and we're talking about a management leadership or political leadership, that understands the importance of these flexible, agile modes, and they're toolkit based, they're not airy-fairy. If you don't have a leadership understanding that, it'll not happen. You'll end up with just, it won't, the change to this toolkit won't occur. The second is, don't try wholesale change all at once. It's about bringing in small-scale projects around, for example, design thinking, design foresight within an organization, achieving success and sharing the story of that success, starting small, iterating, doing it again and again, building up stories of success that then carry the message of the significance, the usefulness of such a management approach. Baby steps, small steps lead to bigger steps. Those are just two examples. The third is workplace learning. And that is, these are tools that we can all learn. Yeah, but they need learning, and you need to practice them. So those three, if you like, are the components of managing change: leadership, small steps, be pragmatic, build up success stories, and third, build up effective workplace learning. And it works. We can do all of those. All of these things are tried and tested.
Building on those points, Michael, there's a question that dives into cultural and generational diversity. And I know Stanford has also been looking into these same topics lately. And for everyone who's listening, this is a great question to bring back, because we have 2 industry keynotes planned next week, and I know they're wrestling with this topic as well. So Michael, a student would like to know, how do you align the work stream towards futures thinking when today's companies have teams with very different cultural and generational diversity?
Oh boy, again, this is a great one. And I'm actually quite surprised that this issue, as you're describing it, Tamara, rightly, of diversity and cultural difference. It's only recently that we've started taking it seriously. There is an idea, that organizational culture is essentially business neutral, culturally neutral. It's not. We know that. So how do you get your head around it? First of all, there are a set of questions of, first of all, how you understand, how you become mindful of the nature of your organization and the world you're working in. This, frankly, calls for a toolkit, yes, and it is, that I'm very actually familiar with. I'm an archaeologist, anthropologist. Anthropology has a toolkit which usually gets called ethnography, for digging into, for understanding exactly what we're talking about here, how people are different, different capacities, differentiation, diversity. This is the subject of the toolkit ethnography that comes under the broad heading of how we understand the human shape of our organizations, our communities, our corporations. So, and ethnography in industry has had a history. It's not particularly well supported, and yet surprisingly so. We need this awareness. We need tools for being aware of who we are, how differentiated or not we are. So first, there's that toolkit for understanding the nature of diversity. The second is the decision-making that can, again, effect change to make us act on this researched awareness of diversity. And that goes back to the leadership, to taking organizational culture seriously. One line that we're pushing now, and I'm working with SAP on this, is to understand how the culture of an organization, which takes in, yes, its diversity or not, how this is rooted, of course, in history, in the past. Not that we just tell the story of how a particular company or corporation has got better over the years at attending to gender diversity, for example. No, it's about seeing, again, with hindsight, what things are like at the moment so that we can act. And we're calling it business archaeology. That is looking archaeologically at the past, at the way business culture was, and how that informs business culture today in a particular circumstance, a particular company, whether it's in Europe, Asia, or the Americas. And that set of insights coming through business archaeology helps us be much more effective in our decision making and action to get to where we want to be in terms of cultural diversity. There are a whole series of other things here that we could talk about as to cultural sensitivity around the world in terms of, different attitudes towards business, attitudes towards customers and consumers, attitudes towards governance. These are part of it too. We're surprisingly only now just getting our heads around it.
As a last question in our few minutes, so the event theme is addressing strategic foresight and futures thinking. And one of the students is curious about the risks that come with thinking about innovation for the future. Are there any risks in terms of trying to apply that thinking today if the market isn't ready or if time isn't right?
I think the risk is not thinking about the future. If you don't, you're going to repeat, it's an old thing, that those who aren't aware of where they've come from and who aren't anticipating, who aren't aware of how actually we are always anticipating different futures. Being aware of this is critical to being more effective in our decision making and less risk taking, actually. It's not about more risk. Oh, let's try this out, but it might fail. If we don't become more aware of different possibilities, we're going to limit options, and that is going to make us more susceptible as a community, as a business, as a culture, more susceptible to the unexpected, the uncertain. One thing is certain, and that the future is uncertain, and you won't be able to predict it. So I would say we cannot afford not to do this. And I think the evidence for that is currently all around us. And if you really wanted me to show you, I can give you examples from human history going back 150,000 years as to why it's important to anticipate the future.
And then, Michael, any words of advice to give to the MBA students and other business folks listening in to your talk today? What can help to drive futures thinking and boost more innovative efforts in the world?
What I was emphasizing there in mindset, and you and I, Tamara, really believe in this. Mindset is a critical thing. Tamara, you talk regularly and appropriately about Carol Dweck, a psychologist, her notion, her concept of a growth mindset. We don't need to go into that here now. It's readily available online, as we know. But mindset, and that's what I was trying to put in there with the problem solution fixation versus a mindset that's more about trying things out and experimental and creative. It's a toolkit we can all acquire. It's something, though, that gets neglected, I fear. And it's because it sounds fuzzy, creativity, innovation. It's not. We're actually extraordinarily good at it because we're human. And just believing in it in terms of a mindset is the first big step we can take towards actually being able to deal with this complex, uncertain world, which is only getting bigger and more complex as we move forward with the challenges of climate change, of urbanization, more people in the world generally, and everything that means in terms, yes, of what we are going to do. Because the fuzziness that we might think is creativity and innovation is actually well thought of in relationship to action orientation. This is not about dreaming up things that aren't going to happen, or that it's not dreaming, it's about action. And that's what I would think I would leave us with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Michael. And for others, have a great week ahead, and we look forward to welcoming you back for other activities as part of our MBA Summit.
Thank you.
Thank you all.